The number one thing that people react to after you kind of make a decision on color and style of a garment is the hand feel. You associate softer, nicer hand feels with better garments. And you can accomplish that in a yarn stage, but you can also accomplish it in finishing and fabric. Some of those finishes may not last the lifetime of the garment. Some of those finishes can wear off, but there are ways to impart luster, softness, etc. in garments.
Welcome to Clothing Culture, a fashion industry podcast at the intersection of technology and innovation. I'm Emily Lane.
And I'm Bret Schnitker. We speak with experts and disruptors who are moving the industry forward and discuss solutions to real industry challenges.
Clothing Culture is produced by Stars Design Group, a global design and production house with more than 30 years of experience. Welcome back to another episode of Clothing Culture. Today, we're going to talk about the little things. Especially when it comes to garments, little things can make a huge difference. We've all had those experiences where we put on that shirt that we think is amazing, it feels buttery soft, but gosh darn, it has that tag in the back that just drives you crazy. Or you get a new shirt and all the buttons fall off. All these little things.
You've actually bought a shirt and all the buttons have fallen off.
All of them all at once.
You're buying it the wrong place. Yeah.
Well, the truth of it is a lot of these little details don't really affect the bottom line on the cost of that garment all that significantly. There are so many decisions all along the way in the development of a garment that can elevate the product without it meaning it's going to cost a lot more. So I thought, let's talk about this and break it down a little bit for everyone on the little decisions all along the way that can change your experience with a garment and not really affect that cost either to the company creating it or to the consumer.
Sure. I think, it all starts all the way in with respect to fibers, and we've kind of talked about this in the past. There are decisions you can make even at fiber stage, longer fibers versus shorter fibers, combed versus carded, ways to arrange those yarns as the fibers are spinning and you're knitting or weaving from that point that affects the quality of the garment. And sometimes visually, the garment on the rack may feel good or look good. It's been pressed. It might have some kind of a finish, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But after the garment goes through a process of washing or cleaning or whatever, these little details, even at fiber stage, can start to show up very quickly and negatively affect the consumer experience in terms of, their satisfaction. One of the big issues when you're dealing with short fibers, and we talk in our industry about carded or combed, and it's a way of spinning the yarn or a process within the spinning of the yarn, and if you're using short fibers, you're doing a carding, which is kind of a basic. If you do open end spinning or whatever, it's a basic kind of way that the fibers are arranged. Once the garment starts washing, one of the first indications of that is torquing. And so torquing is when you buy the garment, the two seams are on either side, look very, very clean. And as the garment starts washing, that seam can sometimes end up almost nearly the front of the garment, depending on the lower the quality of the garment. And these don't really add a lot of cost to it. They're definitely considerations when you're going through and discussing at each stage of your manufacturing process to ensure that you're putting some of these little steps in there. Because customers today, especially with the sustainability movement, we talk about that at great length. It's a big conversation in our industry, and certainly one of the things that's our biggest failure. But people, as part of sustainability, are considering that, hey, I don't want it to be as disposable. I want to wear it longer. Well, in creating those garments that you can wear longer, you're going to have to increase quality so they don't fall apart and they don't end up in landfills. And so it is a beginning step and in some cases, a minor alteration to the cost to do at the fiber stage an improved decision.
Okay, so on the thread of fabric, let's talk about shrinkage. We all hate that when we have that garment. Again, we love it, fits great. First time we wear it, then all of a sudden you wash it, dry it, and it's a totally different garment. What causes that? And is this something that can be prevented?
It's based upon the nature of the fiber. So Natural fibers, in many cases, are hydrophilic, meaning that they absorb water. And in that absorption of water in the drying process, the elongation of the fiber shortens. Synthetic fibers don't really have that much issue because they're hydrophobic. They don't absorb water. Polyester is plastic, for instance. So whenever you put water on a plastic bag, it doesn't penetrate. So you don't have as many issues on synthetics to that degree. But in natural fibers like cotton, that elongation and the drying process is really what shrinks a garment. It's not always the washing process, it's the drying. The heat applied creates a reduction in fiber length, and our garments are frankly made up of a lot of different fibers, right? And so as all of those start shrinking, the garment can shrink in length. A inexpensive addition to that process in fabric stage is called compaction. And they use a hot water treatment to compact the fabric before it goes into a garment. And that can take shrinkages quite a bit down. Typical shrinkages on non-compacted garments in cotton basics and basic constructions like plain weave and poplin are somewhere in the range of 3%. Basic shrinkages in jersey on a length of a garment in knitwear can be somewhere around 5%. Thermals, those kind of warming kind of knitwear we use, they're notorious for shrinkage. Sometimes they can be as high as or over 12%. And so in those cases, instead of just basic compaction, you can also do panel washing. So take the stuff through, get it shrunk down in terms of an actual wash panel. That creates what we call 0-0 finishing, and that helps greatly reduce shrinkage at all levels. And that, for us, is an important thing to add to most all of our natural fiber garments, especially cotton.
What about testing fabric during this production phase? Are there different tests out there that can help make sure that you're really getting what you want, it's the best decision, and so forth?
Yeah, there's a whole battery of tests, and there's a whole battery of testing organizations. Some of them are well known. We happen to utilize Underwriter Laboratories, UL, in a global contract. But there are many out there that can, send or that you can take your garments or fabrics and bring them into a lab, and they can do a battery of tests. Things that customers don't like on fabrics, we've talked about, the more common things are shrinkage. So you can send that into the lab. They do an accelerated washing. They can tell you what that shrinkage is. They can give recommendations to what you'd put on your care content label. They would also make recommendations on how to improve the shrink sometimes. The other things within labs that customers may experience from time to time is crocking or color fastness. There are colors in the spectrum in dyeing that are more notorious for that than others, red being the most. I think maybe throughout our lives, we've all heard about somebody that's had a red garment, thrown that in the laundry with white, and then everything is pink. So that's color fastness to laundering. Crocking, there's dry and wet crocking. So that's when you rub one garment against another. If you put that red garment in with a bunch of stuff in the laundry hamper and they kind of move against each other, or if you're wearing that red garment, you're leaning back on a white leather sofa. On dry crocking, you move it back and forth and you'll see a pink stain that's left. Some dye stuffs perform better dry than they do wet. So if you're going to do a red swimsuit, you want to make sure that wet crocking, as the fabric gets wet, is durable. So sometimes if you do a lab test under dry crocking only, that may pass. When the garment gets wet, then you all of a sudden see a tremendous difference. So there's torquing, as we've talked about, shrinkage, pilling. There's a battery of tests that you can put through to make sure before that fabric goes into production, into whatever type of a apparel piece that you're going to produce, that it's gone through those battery of tests. And I recommend that for all fabrics.
Okay, so you mentioned pilling. Are there things that can be done that are inexpensive options to prevent pilling on that favorite sweater of yours?
Yeah, sure. In a nutshell, there's anti-pill finishes that you can put on things, but there are other choices you can make in terms of the tenacity of the yarn. The stronger the yarn, the less pilling you have. Sometimes some yarns are delicate. If the dennure's really, really fine on a synthetic, What happens in pilling is that when it comes under friction of some sort, the yarn elongates, then snaps and breaks. And that little break all of a sudden pulls back on itself and creates that pill. And that can happen on a very, very micro level. So that's when you kind of see pilling all over garments. Spun polys have a higher nature of pilling than filament polys because they're just overall a lot more delicate. They'll impart a much softer surface, but they're going to pill at a higher rate. Understanding which fabrics and fibers are going to pill and which ones have a tendency not to is that very first process. And then you can have future, additional dialogue to determine content changes, anti-pill finishes, and they're not a major expense to reduce that negative customer consequence.
You mentioned soft hand feel. There's so many things that can contribute to having something that feels amazing to the touch.
Yeah.
Washes and all the dyes, all of those that impart character also impart a feeling to the hand. Tell me a little bit about the options in that space and how that can improve the overall experience with a garment.
Yeah, sure. I think regardless of anyone as a consumer in the apparel industry, the number one thing that people react to after you kind of make a decision on color and style of a garment is the hand feel. You associate softer, nicer hand feels with better garments. And you can accomplish that in a yarn stage, but you can also accomplish it in finishing and fabric. Some of those finishes may not last the lifetime of the garment. Some of those finishes can wear off, but there are ways to impart luster, softness, et cetera, in garments. And sometimes if you're using a lower quality, and I use that in quotation marks. There's all these different levels of quality within yarn. Doesn't mean you're using a low quality, but if you're using a slightly lower quality of yarn versus a really high quality of yarn, the hand feel can tend to maybe be a little bit drier, a little bit raspier. So finishes, and different companies will utilize those finishes to bring back the more luxury finish. And so those can be things like silicone finishes. Silicone finishes impart a kind of an oilier, butterier hand. There's a number of other ones, brushing techniques, micro brushing techniques, enzyme finishes, golf ball washes. There's all these, and it literally looks like a golf ball in a rubber, with a rubber surface. And as it bounces around the drum, it gives these little whisk marks that create this real buttery finish. So there's a number of techniques that exist out there to create really unique and luxurious finishes. And again, depending on the finish, it can be extremely affordable or it can be somewhat costly, but it's for the benefit of a customer picking up a garment and going, wow, that feels fantastic. It will result in returns of customers. Yeah. They'll come back more often. They'll talk about that garment. It's amazing the conversations I've been in, and they wear it. They already have gotten through, I love the look of the garment, but they spend a lot of time talking about, oh my God, I love the way this feels. And so I buy a lot more of it. And I think that's an important thing to not underestimate in the decision-making in your garments.
I myself am somebody who likes to shop, big surprise. And I am often surprised by the garments that I see that have no personality or character when it comes to hand feel or, looking at them. Nothing really separates them from everything else that's out there. And knowing that there are so many options that don't have to really affect the overall price, it surprises me that they're not taken advantage of more. Is it that there's so many options that confuses people? Is it hard to learn about these options? Are they lesser known?
Sometimes it's knowledge, but sometimes it's the bottom line that in a world of the disposable fashion market, finishes take a second seat. It's about how that garment looks on me, and hopefully it fits right because I'm going to wear it a week and then it's going to end up in the landfill. And so I feel that importantly, as we're moving past that disposable kind of mentality, that we're more concentrating on all these aspects that add longevity and luxury to the garment.
Okay, so one of the things that you mentioned was a key decision in purchasing a garment is, does this fit me? We have had a lot of conversations around fit and that being such an important factor in the development of garments. Let's talk a little bit about, some ways to make sure that you're really providing customer satisfaction in that space. And again, these things that really don't affect that bottom line.
Yeah, that's a huge challenge in our industry. We moved down the road on vanity fit. That made the customer feel really good for a lot of years because they would go into many shops and trade down a size and, I've lost weight, even though you probably gained weight. In the world of online, that complicates the issue, this massive variety of different fits. And so I believe that fit is something that can affect consumption of a garment, consumption of fabric, so it can increase costs somewhat, but they're usually minor modifications. And so if you do your homework and you really utilize companies that we've had on before, science of fit companies, to determine the best fit for the industry, an accurate portrayal of fit, and in some of our upcoming episodes, the actual relay or the actual transference of fit information to clients, and you utilize all those hand in hand, your result for fit will be much better, and it doesn't add a ton of cost. So I think it's a really good point.
Really key factor there.
Yeah.
So I mentioned it as we opened this conversation, those scratchy tags that are in the back of the garment. Trims are, kind of one of those things that often get lost, decisions there on how to really shape that experience. And I'm always surprised at, creating a hang tag, or not a hang tag, creating a back label that scratches. You cut it out, you've lost your branding.
Yeah, right.
Usually you can never cut it out fully, so you're still irritated by that. There's gotta be options out there.
Oh, absolutely. Trims have been so confusing for me over the years because they are relatively inexpensive. And the decisions that we make with trims sometimes are pretty short-sighted. To save pennies, we go between different trims. And when you mention the scratchy neck trim, or the neck tape, that's one of the biggest ones that drives me crazy too. Those labels are manufactured in a number of different ways. Taffeta is the least expensive. All neck labels, for the most part today, overall, are made out of polyester. Those neck labels are then woven or jacquarded into the design that says the brand's name or whatever coloration that's in there. And there's different weaving techniques in jacquard. So there's the beginning is taffeta. That's what we see with the scratchy, because as those labels are produced, they're produced on a large bolt of jacquarded fabric, if you will, repeated all the way through. And then they're hot knife cut. So what happens is a hot knife technically cuts those out and it melts the edges. Therefore sealing it. When the edges are melted, that really rough edge exists and that scratchy feeling ends up around your neck. And I've had a number of better garments that they're still using this taffeta technique. Again, the disposable market and bottom line is there. Taffeta is the decision most people make. But if you just upgrade from taffeta to damask, which is a different woven technique, jacquard woven technique, it has woven edges, and the edges become very, very soft. And then the uppermost level, and it has a specific unique look too, is satin. A satin woven label is super soft, has a little bit of iridescence or shine to it, and has a really, really soft edge. Those things actually greatly improve those. The difference between taffeta and damask is very minor. And the difference between damask and satin, again, is another step that's not major. So,
does even thread make a difference?
Sewing thread? Sewing thread can make a difference, but it's not typical that it does. There's some mass marketed groups that will run a monofilament thread to attach certain things, and that can be outrageously scratchy, but that's usually to quickly attach a label if it didn't have one. And so utilizing typical normal sewing thread doesn't really provide much irritation.
What are some other trims that are an easy decision to upgrade?
Well, you mentioned in one of these crazy shirts you bought where all the buttons fell off, every single one.
Completely revealed, yes.
That is when studies have gone out and come back, one of the number one irritations for customers too is that they buy a woven shirt and a knitted shirt and the button falls off. A lot of brands will put extra buttons on there, but the time it takes to go to a tailor, no one really knows how to sew those on anymore.
Hopefully you can still find that button.
Yeah, hopefully you can still find it. It just doesn't happen. So the whole garment's then lost. You've lost the button, you throw the whole garment away and it ends up in a landfill. Not a good situation. So it's generally not the button that breaks. There are cases where the button will break, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but it's how the button is attached. Inexpensive sewing ways is perilous stitch button. They kind of run 2 vertical lines. It quickly assembles the button on there. And those can unravel and come off. There's cross-stitch buttons, which on their own, that's the one that provides durability, but there's a final process where you need to lock it down and it lock stitches the end. And sometimes that doesn't happen and the buttons fall off. So the application of the button adds no cost whatsoever. Ensuring that you use the right decision on that is important today, how you put that button on. Then there's different qualities of buttons. Most buttons that are synthetic, poly-based, resin-based today don't have much of an issue of cracking. We're not that rough on garments typically, nor are cleaners today. Some of the luxury buttons, like shell buttons, etc., natural buttons of any sort, they can have the tendency at sometimes to crack if they're milled at a different level or they're just more delicate. And you find those breaking a lot more readily, and those are usually in upper end garments. So it's interesting when, in effect, the structural integrity of a better quality mother of pearl button or a shell button is milled too thinly and it breaks. When we buy a luxury garment, we blame the dry cleaner. We don't blame the decision maker on the brand because they couldn't possibly have made a bad decision. But typically it comes to making an inaccurate decision on mill density or things like that cause those buttons to crack, not always the dry cleaner.
Right. What about zippers? We all know what a great zipper looks like and what it feels like when you're zipping it up and down. Is that something that you can make decisions about?
Sure. Second most frustrating thing when a zipper breaks.
Right.
We don't see that happen that often. Even kind of no-name or lower branded zippers have greatly improved their quality over the years because the branded zippers, YKK, YBS, Ideal, I could go on and on, Talon, those major zipper companies have really stepped up their game. They've got, kind of sort of guarantees that zippers don't break. And so for other zipper companies to survive, they've got to have some level of quality. So we're not seeing that as often as we used to years ago. But I still would recommend, and I would say that on varying degrees, these different branded zipper companies can have moderate impacts to cost depending on how many zippers you're doing and how big the zipper is. And then some of them can have more of a dramatic cost on an overall garment if you have a lot of zippers and you're using the very most notable name in zippers.
Sure.
But you can certainly do intermediate steps to improve an issue of a zipper breaking.
What about those brandable moments? A lot of times, you're buying a particular garment because you support the brand, you like the aesthetic of the brand. So there's things where you've got, brands on snaps, buttons, zipper pulls,
Sure.
Even design features. Are those kinds of things that are relatively easy to implement?
Certainly offshore, they're easy to implement. And if you're meeting offshore minimums, having branded and logoed buttons is easy to do. It adds to the branding statement, and it does not add a significant amount of cost. Very minor.
Okay. With so many consumers shopping online, a lot of us, we aren't going to the store and getting that, fancy bag from the store and carrying our garment home. It's coming to us in the mail. There's, I'm sure, lots of wonderful ways to elevate that experience through shipping as well.
Sure, reshippable bags printed with a great image and reinforcing your brand can help as the customer sees it. In fact, we're seeing a major growth in these packaging elements that are coming into different homes today. It's other opportunities to reinforce brand statements. Printed boxes, printed Mylar bags. Those are printed tissue paper. All those things are individual decisions, brand by brand. Certainly ones that are maybe more sustainable in thought process, minimize a little bit of that because that stuff just ends up being thrown away. I would always recommend doing your best to use biodegradable or eco-friendly bags. And there are some of those out there that you could certainly print on and look great.
Yeah, they feel really good too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, well, those are a lot of wonderful insights as to options you can make that really don't affect the bottom line on that garment too much, but can make all the difference. Are there any other call outs that you think we should mention before we wrap today's conversation?
I think we've covered a lot of the major ones. And I think on a case-by-case basis, we're open to any questions. You can, as you subscribe and you reach out to us, we're happy to answer all those things. But there's a number of elements, as you can see, all the way through the manufacturing process, that little tweaks make a huge difference.
Absolutely. Yes. Don't hesitate to reach out to us at Stars Design Group. If you have any more questions, we're happy to help you navigate this space of elevating your garments with those little small details. Thank you for joining us today. Don't forget to subscribe and stay apprised of upcoming episodes of Clothing Culture.